Hi, I'm Alex Paulton. I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Talking Timepieces, where we talk about watch collecting and horology. Today we're going to look at just a cute little vintage piece I have, picked up relatively recently, a little Duxot, almost a world timer. We're going to take a close look at it and, talk about how this is Doxa's little sister, kind of their tutor, as it were, from the Doxa that died during the Quartz Wars. The current Doxa doesn't have a Duxot side label, but the old Doxa actually did have a Duxot side label, and this watch is from that. So let's turn the camera around and take a close look at this interesting watch. And we're going to look at the movement as well. But before we start, don't forget, if you like this show, subscribe, please, and leave a like. It really does matter. Let's turn the camera around. So here is the Duxot of Switzerland. Very elegant sounding name. As I mentioned, it is, or was, I should say, a Doxa secondary brand. I wouldn't go as far as to say it was a tutor of Doxa, because it was more of an off-brand than a way for Doxa to sell their parts or their DNA, as it were. These kinds of watches represent both the height of the 70s watch era and the stagnation that existed during that time. Because, well, first off, this is a really cute watch. It's a pretty presentation. I love the white and blue sector dial. It really is a sharp piece in that sense, and it has a city wheel. Now, it's not a true world timer, but you can actually do world time calculation on the fly. So I would call it a world time function, not a world time complication, because a complication is actually a part of the movement. Now, when I was saying about the 70s being both the, represent some of the heyday and some of the worst parts of the watch industry, it was very commonplace to have, watches that had your name on it, but you didn't really do anything to make them. And some of them turned into serious companies. Like Wachman was an American who imported cases and movements and the like, and eventually wound up getting bought up by the company that wound up becoming Breitling. It interesting how things go. Hans Wilsdorf started Rolex by putting together cases and movements from other manufacturers. Rolex turned in-house by buying the company that made their movements over the years. This one, for example, this Chrono Sport, is a perfect example of it's a familyless orphan. It was made from off-the-shelf parts, given a name, and the company doesn't exist and doesn't even have a real record in history. So the 70s had a lot of cool watches, but the industry itself was kind of stagnant, because all of these watches were using the same cases and all of them were using same designs. We were just buying all of the parts out of a catalog. So when the Quartz war, I like to call it, the trade war that was the Quartz Crisis, came along, the Swiss watch industry was not prepared, because they weren't used to making watches anymore. They were used to assembling watches. Only some companies were good at it. One of the reasons Rolex survived the Quartz Crisis is because it was a tool watch company at the time and prided itself, and it still does, of course, on making excellent, functional, useful watches. And so it was able to survive a lot of the Quartz Crisis because professionals still bought them, whereas these watches, are cool, but why pay the prices for a mechanical watch that was put together with off-the-shelf components when a Quartz watch from one of the Japanese companies with equal to or better fit and finish had a more accurate movement at a lower price? I can see why these guys and gals got into trouble. But looking at the Duxot of Switzerland, As I said, it was an off-brand of Doxa. Duxot exists today as a company. I believe it's out of Hungary, but it has no longer a connection to Doxa. And of course, it no longer says Duxot of Switzerland on any of the watches. They just say Duxot. It may not even be a connection beyond the name. There may be no DNA between these two lines. But this is a pretty watch. It looks attractive. It is functional. I was actually surprised at how low the beat was on it. I believe it's a 6 hertz piece. And when you think about the watch and all, I'm going to open it up. Let us take a quick look at the movement. And then we'll do some measurements and put it on the wrist. But yeah, this is your standard off-the-shelf watch. If you notice, it says anti-magnetic. It just basically means it's a non-ferrous hairspring, or a lesser than magnetic hairspring, put it that way, and a stainless steel back. When it says stainless steel back, you know that's the only part of the watch that's made out of stainless steel, which means this is probably plated brass for the case. Now, I already pre-loosened it, so I'm just going to use my little ball to pop off the back. Boom. And there we have the movement. Let me zoom back out a little bit. And then we'll zoom back in. Let's put it on the stand so we get a nice braced presentation. Yeah, let's turn it this way just to make sure we can see everything. There we go. And let's zoom in. Now, the interesting thing about this piece is it says Nareda inside of it, but there's like also almost nothing online in web search to tell you what that company actually did or where it was based and all. If you have any information out there, please leave it in the comments. I would love to know more about who made this movement. As you see, it's a pretty big wheel, and it's spinning at a pretty slow rate, oscillating at a pretty slow rate. And 17 joules. It's just an interesting movement. It's a really cute piece, and it's not a bad watch. I mean, when you think about it, this is a nicely done movement. If you were selling a watch with this movement today, you know, you could charge several hundred. I would say, well, if you know something like this, you could probably get away with an $800 watch if it was made today with modern fit and finish, nice mechanical movement, and it actually is an attractive watch. So let's cover it up, and let's do some measurements and throw it on the wrist. So okay, and then let's tighten it a little bit. I'll tighten it up more later, but yeah, you should always have the proper tools when you're doing anything with these watches, because the number one way that people scratch up their watches or render them otherwise, we're out of zoom. Come on, focus. Let's get this in there. So one of the number one ways that people wind up scratching their pieces or otherwise damaging them is trying to work on them using the wrong tools. They try to take off a pin and they scratch a lug, or they try to take off the back and they scratch the back up all to hell. This is a tight lug spacing, by the way. Shrouded lugs, as you can see, but it's a nice watch. Let's see something here just to think. I doubt it's sapphire, and I am right. It is totally not sapphire. I mean, it feels like plastic, but hey, it never hurts to be sure. And measurement wise, would be nice if I turned it on. Let's zoom out a little bit for the measurements. Okay. So we got, I'd say it's about a 38. Right. Let's look at it let's do it from the rear so we can avoid the bezel. Although the bezel is, of course, a big part of it. So if we look at the case is about a 37, but then the bezel adds about a millimeter to it. So it's a 38 with the bezel, which means it's actually wearable today. I mean, 38 is still a very popular size. So this was large for its day, being a sports watch, and so now it's actually still within the sweet spot for watches. So one of these arguments about buying a vintage piece is, if you get the right one, you could wear it today. 11.7, nice and, I wouldn't say very thin because it's only a three-hander, well, with date function, so it excuses a little bit of that. Let's toss it on the wrist real quick. Wristwatch Check, I'm wearing my recently acquired IWC Pilot. I had been really on the fence about my next watch because I miss my Rolex Explorer 2, but I can't buy another Rolex at this point. I really can't. And so I decided to buy the IWC, and that killed my discretionary money, so I don't have the money to buy a Rolex or even think about it at this point. I used the money that I would have used on one Rolex to buy the Omega Rattrapante, the split-second watch you saw in the last video, and that IWC. So you think about it, two great watches for the price of one overpriced piece. But this is a nice little piece. You could put this on a metal bracelet if you wanted, but I think, when you think about the fact that this is a couple $100 worth of vintage watch, you throw it on a NATO, and you have something there. It's a pretty piece, looks good. A great argument, like I said, for buying vintage pieces. So let's turn the camera around and close out the episode. So that was the Duxot, a cute little watch and a perfect example of how nice vintage watches can be as a nice way to flesh out a collection. Thanks for taking the time to watch. Really appreciate it.